Hello everyone. My name is Adriana Cutler, and I am a Senior Program Officer in the Division of Preservation and Access at the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the coordinator of the Preservation Assistance Grants for Smaller Institutions program. Thank you for attending today's webinar. Thanks also to my colleague, Program Analyst Sarah Bateman, who will be assisting with Q&A today. Today, today we'll go over what Preservation Assistance Grants, or PAG as we like to call it, can fund, share some examples of previously funded projects, and go over how you can apply for an award. I'll offer some suggestions for writing a good application and answer some frequently asked questions. That should leave us with plenty of time to discuss a few of your own project ideas and answer any of your specific questions. Please type your questions into the chat box, which Sarah will be monitoring during the presentation. And note that closed captioning is available. To access it, click on the three dots at the top of your screen, then go to Language and Speech, and then select Show Live Captions. This webinar will also be recorded, and you will receive an email with a link to the video on YouTube in the coming weeks. The Preservation Assistance Grants Programs is administered by NEH's Division of Preservation and Access, which is one of the 7 divisions and offices that run grant programs. We recognize that in smaller organizations, implementing preservation needs may happen incrementally. Therefore, this program is designed to cover a wide range of needs to encourage repeat applications and to support a combination of preservation activities. At its heart, the point of this program is to enable small and mid-sized organizations to build their institutional capacity, often by bringing in outside experts in conservation and preservation to provide advice, help develop preservation plans, and provide preservation or collections management training. For those institutions who have never had one, we recommend starting with a general preservation assessment by a qualified consultant whose preservation skills and expertise are related to the types of collections that are the focus of your project. For instance, you may require a conservator with a specialty in objects or paper or paintings. Similarly, you will want to find a consultant who is knowledgeable about the preservation of collections in your type of institution, whether a library, archive, museum, or other cultural heritage organization. These assessments give organizations a roadmap with the steps they'll need to take to improve the physical care and intellectual control of their collections. Assessments also provide recommendations for preservation supplies and equipment, such as acid-free storage boxes, archival photo sleeves, archival shelving, or environmental monitoring equipment, such as data loggers or light meters, which may be purchased with PAG awards. This program can also fund more specific consultations with preservation and conservation professionals, such as digital preservation assessments, conservation assessments, and the development of disaster preparedness and response plans. Finally, institutions may also request funds through a general PAG request for education and training in preservation and collections care for their staff and volunteers. As you can see on this slide, PAG awards are up to $10,000. Your project may take up to 18 months to complete, beginning as early as September 1st in the year that you apply. Funding requests can be for any one or a combination of these activities. Although PAG awards can fund many activities, conservation treatment and digitization or other methods of reformatting are not eligible. Last year, we introduced a slate of new eligible activities that can be in combination with the previously mentioned activities to help you more holistically address your collections preservation and collections management needs. And we're happy to highlight them again this year. The first is that along with hiring preservation consultants, you can also fund consultations with source communities and scholars. This can look like consulting with the source community to determine culturally appropriate preservation practices, or to document community rules around access. Another example is working with a scholar to help provide contextual information for items in your collection that may be missing descriptions, so that you can determine and prioritize future preservation and collections management needs. The next addition is the expansion of the types of plans and policies that you can develop. Along with preservation plans and disaster preparedness plans, you can also use PAG funds to develop or update collection management plans, collecting plans, loan policies, processing manuals, and digitization plans. For many of these policies, plans, and manuals, it can be helpful to hire a consultant with the appropriate expertise that complements the skills of your staff as needed to assist you. We also formally added the ability to use PAG funds for activities such as format surveys, inventories, and condition reports. This will allow you to use funds to do things such as update location information in your collections management systems as you rehouse a collection, or add information from condition reports from a conservation assessment. Our hope is that by adding these activities, or these kinds of activities to the program, that we will be able to support your preservation and collections management needs in a way that better reflects the ways in which you are already doing this work in tandem. New this year, we have increased the amount of funding that organizations in non-contiguous states and jurisdictions, that is Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, Guam, and the Northern Marianas, may request to cover the increased cost of consultant travel and supply shipping to those locations. To clarify, applicants can request the typical $10,000 for their project activities, and then in addition, include the actual costs of travel or shipping from outside their state or jurisdiction up to $5,000 worth. For example, if an applicant in Guam needs to hire a consultant from, say, Hawaii, the mainland US, or even Australia, they can request the $10,000 to cover the consultant's fees, plus up to an additional $5,000 to cover the cost of their travel to the island. Our hope is that by addressing the substantially increased costs for travel and shipping to these locations that applicants outside the mainland US face, that they will be able to make better use of PAG awards to help with their preservation efforts. Program reminders from our recently updated guidelines. First, while you can still apply for disaster preparedness and planning activities, such as developing disaster response plans, disaster response training, and purchasing supplies for disaster response kits, last year we sunset our disaster response encouragement that also allowed conservation and other activities in response to federally declared disasters. Instead, we recommend that if you are impacted by a federally declared disaster, that you contact your immediate relief funding. NEH is working with the state councils as much as possible to distribute funding in these events. On occasion, we also activate the Chair's Disaster Recovery Grants program. This program is currently available for organizations that were impacted by Hurricanes Helene and Milton. For more information about that program, please go to the NEH website. Second, I wanted to remind you all of updates to funding restrictions. We're no longer restricting PAG funds used towards software or cloud storage purchases or licenses. That said, it will still be important. Finally, given that many of these kinds of systems require continued funding, it will be important to demonstrate how you will sustain these costs after the grant period. Now that we've gone over both the funded activities and major updates to the program, here are a few examples of funded projects to give you a better sense of what they look like. Elizabeth City State University in North Carolina received an initial award supporting a general preservation assessment of the university archives, documenting the history of one of the nation's oldest historically Black colleges and universities. Based off this assessment, they subsequently received 4 more PAG awards to fund the purchase of archival shelving for manuscripts and publications, photographs and film negatives, and items housed in cold storage. This is an example of a case where the institution, Elizabeth City State University, is larger, but the unit within it, the archives, is smaller. The Carrick Tribe of California received an award to purchase environmental monitoring and preservation supplies and train staff in their use to support the collection's care of necklaces, clothing, historic photographs, and basketry that document the pre-contact life and culture of the tribe, which are housed in the Carrick Tribe People's Center. The Chicago Film Archives hired a consultant to perform a digital preservation which provides recommendations for how best to preserve born digital and digitized collections. The project also resulted in a digital collections policy for the archive's over 25,000 and growing collection of films, prints, videotapes, audio tapes, and ephemera, reflecting life in the Midwest between 1903 and the late 1990s, which now amount to over 20 terabytes of data. The Genesee Country Village and Museum in New York hired a consultant to assist them with developing an emergency response plan and train staff in disaster response activities and how to work with first responders and other partners. They also purchased supplies to be better prepared for potential future emergencies at the museum's John L. Wheel Gallery, which houses paintings, drawings, prints, and sculptures from the 17th century, illustrating the lives of New Yorkers and regional Quakers. Our final example is from the Rollins College Digital Archive from Winter Park, Florida, which hosted a 2-day Preserving Digital Objects with Restricted Resources, or as it is more commonly known, POWER, workshop for their staff and 23 participants from across the southern United States. For the archivists at Rollins and similar organizations who do not currently have in-house systems for the long-term preservation of digital assets, or the resources to outsource this work, the workshop provided training in digital preservation activities, such as performing fixity checks, capturing automated metadata, and migrating files. Additionally, the cohort who attended the training expanded the community of digital preservation practitioners within the region. This is a great example of hiring consultants to train your organization staff, but also opening up the trainings to neighboring institutions, allowing for the building of your local preservation community. Now that you have an idea of the kinds of activities that can be funded, let's go over who can apply and how. Applicants must be either U.S. nonprofit organizations, specifically 501c3s, institutions of higher education, state and local government agencies, or federally recognized tribal governments. Individuals and foreign and for-profit organizations are not eligible. Applicants must also show that they care for or responsibility for the collections that are the focus of the application. Have at least one staff member or full-time equivalent, paid or unpaid, and make their collections available for research, education, and/or public programming purposes. Along with our programmatic encouragements, we also want to encourage certain institution types and communities to apply. That includes small and mid-sized organizations that have never applied to NEH for an award, community colleges, tribal colleges and universities, historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, Native American tribes and Native Alaskan and Native Hawaiian organizations, and other collecting institutions whose humanities collections highlight historically excluded communities. If your organization does not line up with one of these areas, you should absolutely still apply. The encouragements are meant to signify particular interests of ours, but they are not meant to privilege certain types of projects or applicants. By now, you're probably wondering what you need to include in your proposal. Knowing that most of our applicants to this program are in small organizations, we try to make the application process as straightforward as possible. The main component of a PAG application is the project narrative. This is a 5-page, single-spaced document where you will describe your collections and the activities you would like to undertake, and answer questions that help address the review criteria. Before sitting down to write your narrative, you may want to do some information gathering with colleagues, audience members, or other stakeholders. Get a good sense of your organization's mission, the scope and content of your collections, your audience, and what you provide for them. If the general public is a large portion of your audience, think about how that breaks down. Are they genealogists, families, lifelong learners, K through 12 schools and universities in your area? Gather some numbers to help illustrate your case. How many visits do you get a year? What about research requests? Can you clearly quantify your collections? Those hard numbers can say a lot. Or establish priorities. This should make writing a bit easier. It is okay to format your narrative in a short answer approach, listing the questions as they appear in the guidelines, called the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, and then your response. It is also important to be clear upfront regarding for what activities you are seeking funding. Then you will want to describe the content and size of the humanities collections that are the focus of the project, how they are currently used, and how the proposed project would increase access and use of said collections. Tell us why your collections are significant, locally and regionally, and ways that they may fit in with national themes in American history. Including some interesting and specific examples from within your collections will help strengthen your case. You will then need to describe the nature and mission of your institution and state whether your organization has ever received a preservation or conservation assessment, or what other plans, policies, or procedures your project will follow or is based on. And on sustaining your project outcomes. For example, if your project is to receive a preservation assessment, what will be your next steps to begin addressing the recommendations? Or if you are implementing cloud storage for your digital collections, how will your institution sustain that cost after the grant period? Finally, you will want to discuss the project staff and consultants and their qualifications. In addition to the narrative, we ask you to include some supporting information to bolster your case for funding. All applicants and budget application, which is a written explanation of the line items in your budget. If your project includes voluntary cost share, this is where you would indicate it. Your total on your budget form should be equal to your total request from NEH. Another requirement is the inclusion of a detailed work plan, where you outline the specific steps to achieve your project's goals. You may want to format this as a bulleted list, table, or Gantt chart. A monthly or quarterly breakdown is often helpful level of detail, and you should also make note of who's working on what. Also, don't forget to build in a little padding time. If reasonable for your project, we recommend requesting the full 18 months allowed. After the last few years, we all know that unexpected emergencies arise and shipments arrive late, causing unexpected delays to your project. Finally, all applicants must include resumes or CVs for the staff and consultants participating in the project. Applicants who are requesting funds for a consultant must also include a letter of commitment from said consultant, and we highly recommend that applicants requesting only supplies or equipment include the previous assessment on which the request is based. Required, other supporting documents, including workshop descriptions and other documentation, are encouraged. For example, if your project includes activities such as surveys or basic description, we recommend including the relevant policies and procedures. If your project includes any self-assessment components, we recommend including the framework or toolkit you will be using. Please be sure to consult the application components table in the NOFO for a full list of forms and documents that must be or may be included in your application package, as well as suggested page limits. As you prepare to compose your application, I highly recommend reading the sample narratives we have listed on the program resource page on the NEH website. Given that these samples were responding to previous versions of the NOFO, you should not imitate them, but do use them as an example of how someone else made a case for their project, and they can help you think about structure and form. For more tips on what makes a good proposal and the application process in general, please read the Tips on Applying for a Preservation and Access Award at the top of our blog. We will also post a link to it in the chat. As I mentioned, when discussing the narrative portion of the application, the program has specific review criteria that we ask our panelists to consider when reading your proposal. Here are the criteria for PAG. As you can see, these criteria focus on the significance of the materials, the appropriateness of the work planned, and the qualifications of the staff. The criteria are included in the notice of community, and you print them out or keep them open on your computer so that you can have them top of mind as you are writing your application. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that you start thinking about the logistics of submitting your application as soon as possible. Applications to NEH are submitted through a web portal called grants.gov. It's a fairly smooth system, but it would be good for you to spend some time getting familiar with it before you submit your application. Along with grants.gov, you will also need to be registered with SAM.gov, or the System for Award Management. These registrations can take up to 1 month, so I recommend checking your registration status or working with your Office of Sponsored Projects, if you have one, early on in the application process so that you don't encounter any issues when it is time to submit your application. You may also need to make a login.gov account, which is quick and easy, or set up a unique entity identifier, or UEI number, which may take a little more time. The next deadline is 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on January 9th, 2025. I recommend submitting your application a day or two in advance. That way, if your application is rejected for a technical reason, such as an invalid file type, you have a chance to correct the issue and resubmit before the deadline closes. Unfortunately, we are only able to give extensions in cases of major weather events, such as hurricanes or floods, or if the grants.gov system itself was down. Should you need any assistance with the technical submission process, grants.gov support is available 24/7. Please follow the requirements and naming conventions described in the NOFO carefully as you develop the PDFs that you will upload into grants.gov. And make sure that the PDFs are flat files. Full details on grants, SAM, and login.gov are in section D3 of the NOFO. Full details on submitting your application are in section D4. Every NEH grant application goes through a process of peer review. Applications are sorted into panels with regard to institution or collection type. For instance, historic house museums, public libraries, art collections, and library special collections. Then, my colleagues and I identify people like you working in your field. Each review panel typically includes administrators and content specialists and conservators or other preservation specialists. They will evaluate the applications based on the criteria we went over, assign a rating, and write comments. NEH staff then takes these panel recommendations to the July meeting of the National Council on the Humanities, pictured here, a board of 26 humanities professionals appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. The NEH chair, who has the sole authority to grant funding, takes all these recommendations into account when making award decisions. All this means that your application is being evaluated by people like you, people who know the humanities and who understand the work you do. Once the chair has made final decisions, notifications will go out sometime in August. After awards are announced, all applicants may request to see the reviewer's comments. These can prove helpful for improving a funded project or developing an application for resubmission if an application was not successful this time around. Preservation and access staff are always available to answer your questions. But here are a few we receive frequently that I am happy to answer now. Many institutions call us wondering if they would be considered small or mid-sized. Because we work with so many different institution types, like museums, libraries, and historical societies, it is not possible for us to give a clear-cut answer based on factors such as collection size, staff, or budget. Instead, we invite you to make the case for how your institution is small or mid-sized compared to other like organizations. I will also note that smaller units within larger institutions, such as a university museum or archive, generally fit this description. And please note that this is not an eligibility requirement. If you would like to see a list of more projects that have been funded through PAG, you can click the Search All Past Awards link under the Grants tab of the NEH website. Many applicants ask us how they can find a consultant. Generally, you will want to find a preservation specialist whose expertise is aligned with the type of collections you have and with your institution type. While we cannot recommend specific consultants, you can find links in to help you with your search. Finally, I wanted to share a few additional general NEH resources that may assist you, especially if you are a first-time applicant. The first is a recording of an introductory webinar for small and mid-sized organizations about the NEH application process. The second is a general set of NEH application tips, available in both English and Spanish. Now we'd like to open up the floor to questions. If we don't make it to your question, please email it to preservation@nih.gov or call 202-606-8570. Myself, Sarah, and the rest of the Preservation and Access team are always here to assist you through the application process. And to sign up for email updates on PAG and other NEH funding programs, please visit the link on this slide, which we will also make sure to have in the chat and is also available on our website. So with that, we can definitely open it up to questions.
All right, Adriana, our first question comes from Therese, and Therese asks, does a digitization plan mean a plan to preserve born digital materials or a plan for future digitization of physical materials?
That is a great question. So a digitization plan is a plan to digitize non-born digital materials. If you would like a plan to help preserve your born digital materials, that would just wording, but both of them are eligible activities in PAG.
And then our next question comes from Kate. Oh, actually, we're going to move on to Laura. So would islands that are accessible only by boat within the contiguous 48 states still be able to access the additional $5,000 for travel and shipping?
That's a great question. So unfortunately, at this time, the initiative is only for entire states and jurisdictions that are not accessible via that are not contiguous to the US. It is not for sort of offshoot islands from US states, but that is definitely something that we can consider for future iterations of the NOFO.
And then our next questions come from Cherie. First, can we name staff time for grant reporting requirements within our request? And what is the difference between a contractor and a subrecipient?
Those are both great questions. So to answer the first one, yes, staff time is eligible, whether it is for staff time on, direct project activities or for some of the reporting activities. It just needs to be sort of commensurate with the actual amount of time that you will be using. The other, I'm sorry, can you repeat the second question, Sarah?
What is the difference between a contractor and a subrecipient?
Sure. So a contractor is usually who you will have for a PAG. If that's going to be, a consultant that you hire to, assess your collections or to provide training. A subrecipient is usually something that we see in larger projects where, say, there are two organizations. Let's say there's two libraries that are working together to try to bring sort of like collections that they have together, sort of on source. Right, that's where we would see you would have, because applications can only be submitted by one applicant, but say you have staff working in two different organizations, that's where you would see the subrecipient situation where you have the main applicant and then the second institution that is providing staff for the project would be known as a subrecipient. So you see that more in some of our larger projects, in different funding programs that we have that do fund digitization work. But for PAG, really, you're going to be looking at the contractor status for consultants.
And then our next question comes from Rebecca. Rebecca asks, would a preservation assessment related to readiness and eligibility for inclusion on the National Register of Historic Places be eligible?
That's a great question. It's not ineligible, I will say that. I don't think but it's probably less competitive. You know, the program is not really meant to focus on building structures and the needs of historic buildings in that sense. It's really about the collections housed within those structures. So we will have applications from organizations that are in historic structures, but it's usually about the collections within them. Whereas a project that's really about assessing the building as the object and its historicness for, you know, trying to make that case for the register. While I don't think that there's anything we have in the NOFA that says it's ineligible, we do generally have focus on collections rather than buildings, even though I understand that sometimes with the building can be seen as a collection item.
And then our next question comes from Laura. What if an organization is only full-time for a specific season and closed temporarily?
So that's fine. We don't have specific guidelines on the number of days that you have to be open. It's really just sort of making the case for, you know, discussing sort of how accessible you are throughout, you know, at just overall. But we don't have like a specific limitation in that sense, in terms of, you know, you have to be open X number of days a year. That used to be I think a restriction in I don't know, like 10 years ago, but at this point we don't have that restriction.
And the next question comes from Lucas. My question is about what NEH hopes the grants achieve. My sense is that you are looking to invest less in ongoing operating costs, but more in one-time investments in either equipment or preservation plans via consultants that leave an organization better able to preserve its materials. Am I hearing that correctly?
Thank you, Lucas. So it's sort of a combination of the two, I say. It's accurate that we're not necessarily funding sort of your general operating support. That is accurate. These are project-based, you know, awards. However, the idea with these project-based awards really is about building that institutional capacity. So yes, while, you know, funding, you know, consultant for the assessment is a one-time support, we are looking for folks to come back to us. So just because you get an award once from us doesn't mean you can't get an award again. And as you saw in the examples, we have folks that come back 4, 5, 6, 7 times and can be successful. Because the idea is that, you know, you have sort of your game plan, you figure out what are the steps that we need to do to really have a good setup for our collections care, for our preservation setup, and be able to chip away at that incrementally. And so that's really sort of the focus. So while it's not general operating support, we are hoping to be able to help organizations along their preservation journey, from figuring out what's your roadmap to then implementing many of the different components of that roadmap. So say that preservation assessment says you need to start an environmental monitoring, you know, in your organization. Well, then you can come back to us and request you know, data loggers, light meters, training in how to set up your environmental monitoring system, the tracking all of that. Another recommendation in that same assessment could be you need to rehouse these collections and, you know, acid-free boxes and folders, and so then you can come back to us for those items. So It's really, yes, it's not just your general operating support. It really is about building that institutional capacity and being able to assist you over time.
So our next question comes from Julia. We have started writing our disaster plan in-house since it is so tailored to each institution, but have been heavily relied on NEDCC's webinars, seminars, and resources. Would we be able to apply for supplies to build disaster kits / run staff workshops of exercises in disaster response? Would we need a consultant report to prove why we need the supplies we need, and to build the disaster kits and run the staff workshops in order to have a stronger application?
That's a great question. So, well, having an outside consultant report is always helpful, and sometimes is the best way to go if you don't feel like you have that expertise in house. It's not a requirement. As you said, you've begun to develop your disaster plan already in house. So, what would be great in this situation would be, providing the disaster response plan or draft that you already have. So submitting that as part of your backup documentation and showing why within your plan you already have, these recommended supplies that you've decided are appropriate, and requesting for the training. So it's not that you have to have somebody from outside. It's really that the consultants are there. We recommend that in situations where your staff may not have the expertise needed. But if your internal staff already has that expertise, or you've already been receiving that training, then that is sufficient. You just need to be able to demonstrate that through your, through the addendum documents that you provide, and also in your CVs. So you'll want to make sure that the resumes that you do provide to us really show the backgrounds and trainings that you have already been receiving and working on and doing in preservation or in disaster response in the subject area for which you're requesting the funding for. And that will really help to strengthen the application.
Right, and our next question comes from Kate. Do you have any suggestions about finding cultural heritage professionals to work with as consultants or evaluating their skills and offerings? And how do organizations typically handle compensating a consultant for the work that goes into prepping a PAG grant application?
Those are great questions. So in terms of finding a consultant, when it comes to not a sort of a preservation conservation consultant, which we do have links to different organizations where you can find those in the NOFO. If we're talking about more dealing with, maybe a sort of consultant to deal with the actual content of the collection. We don't have any sort of links or recommendations right now, but I think what I would say is this. For example, if you have a collection that is from, really related to a specific community or group, say you have a museum collection and it includes, tribal materials from specific tribes. I would highly recommend getting in touch with the cultural centers of those tribes. Many indigenous communities, many tribes have their own cultural officers or cultural centers, as well as their own sort of libraries and archives. And those are sort of the staff that you'll want to begin dialogue with to see if they would be interested in working with you to better figure out ways to better deal with the collections of theirs that you are stewarding and what that should look like moving forward. So that's sort of one scenario. Another one is you just have a collection, a general U.S. historic collection. I would recommend seeing what if there are universities in your area or the closest universities in your area, and going to different sort of scholars that are working with the material types and working with the subject matter that your collections are about. And so those would be the kinds of folks that you might want to bring in to help you if you have collection items that maybe they're from this general time period, they're from this sort of general theme, but you are missing a lot of information. And those are the kinds of folks who might be able to help you with actually sort of getting a better handle on the actual nature of your collections to be able to sort of have better information and description in your collections management. In terms of how you go about necessarily paying the consultants, that is really, different consultants have different amounts that they request. We don't have specific dollar amounts that we give out. That's really up for you to sort of coordinate and work with that consultant to decide what their fee should be for that work. I hope that answered the question.
The next question's from Erica. One of the slides mentioned description of how we will sustain cost in the future. Was this specific to cloud storage and software? I ask because we are looking at a more expensive environmental monitoring system that will require replacement every 3 years as part of the subscription model, and want to make sure to include how we will continue to fund that equipment in the narrative if reviewers will be wanting to see that.
That's a great question. And I would say that, yes, I would include that. Basically anything that requires, replacement, frequent replacement or some sort of subscription. I do know that there are there's some new environmental monitors out there right now that are more of like a rental rather than a purchase like the old PEM monitors were. So I think that it is important to describe that as part of sort of your sustaining the project over the long term.
And our next question is from Catherine. Can you describe the way projects are scored by panels?
That's a great question. So we have just sort of, a general rating system. It really is based on, the review criteria though. So, it's sort of, think about it like you're getting graded at school or in a, in a university setting. It's not ABCD, but it's a similar system. But really, it's all based on that review criteria. So that's the important piece. So those review criteria that we list in the notice of funding opportunity, they link back to the areas in the narrative that we are sort of asking about. And so that's why it's important to really look at, the review criteria with the sort of prompts in the narrative that they relate to, and make sure that when you're answering those prompts, that you're also answering the questions in the review criteria, because that is what we give the panelists, nothing else. There's no other sort of secret other side questions that we have for them or other things that they need to review. It is literally exactly what you see in the notice of funding. That is what we give them. Those same questions, that's what they must review on. So that's really the important piece. After that, it's, we have a panel of a number of folks. We try as much as possible to have panels of 4 people, but that is not always possible. So know that there can be variation there. We always make sure to have no less than 3 people reviewing any application though. So it is that's why we have the people with the different expertise in that review system. We make sure to have folks who are dealing from an administrative side, folks who are dealing with content. So that's going to look like curators, collections managers, and folks that are really know about preservation. So preservation, folks in preservation, conservators that are dealing with the types of collections that you have. So that's really the key piece. It's always people that are dealing with your type of institution, your types of collections that are going to be reviewing your application. And then they're going to be following those review criteria and nothing else. So, that all is what goes into that review system. Once we get their reviews, those reviews are presented to the National Council. They give their input, and then that goes to the chair, who does have the sole authority to make decisions. But they really take into account everything that those panel reviewers, who are folks like yourselves, are providing. And actually, I highly recommend, if by any chance you decide not to apply this year, which I hope you will apply, but if by any chance you decide not to, a great thing to do in the year before you decide to apply is to contact us and say, hey, if possible, I'd love to be a panelist. Get on our list of possible panelists. Because going through that panel review system and being on the panelist side is a great way to get a sense of what makes for a strong project, and how that whole side of things works. So I highly recommend that. If you're interested, please contact us. We would love to have you as panel reviewers as well as applicants. Of course, you can't be panel reviewer in the year that you're an applicant, but otherwise we would love to have you.
And our next question comes from Carrie. Can we submit more than one project application? We have a few that are good fits that could happen concurrently.
That's a great question. So the short answer is technically yes. The long answer is it's a little more complicated. So for example, say you are a larger institution and you have smaller subunits. So you're a university and you have a museum and you have an archive or a special collection and you have a library. Each of those individual units can apply. If you are sort of more of like a smaller organization like a local historical society, and you have multiple projects that you want to submit, while technically you could, you would be in competition with yourself. So in a situation like that, all of your proposals are likely going to go to the same panel. So your own proposals would be in competition with each other as well as the other proposals on that panel. So it makes it a little trickier. The other thing I will say is that you can't have overlapping budgets. So you'd have to be really careful about that. You'd have to make sure that you don't have staff time, amongst all the 3 applications, and then it's over 100% of whatever that staff time could be for, what would be reasonable for those projects. So it's just, it does make it more complicated. So while the short answer is technically yes, it really depends on your type of institution and, what the projects are and how you're applying, and just knowing that you would be in competition with yourself.
The next question is from Robert. Is it acceptable for 2 small nonprofits to work with an archive at a state university to add to their archives and help the university preserve materials in their archives?
That is a great question. So I think that depends. It's certainly generally as a project within the humanities, within this division, I would say yes. I think that kind of a project, depending on the size and scope, may be a better fit for a different program. So we have a program called Humanities Collections and Reference Resources, which is a little better equipped to deal with projects that are really multi-institution projects and sort of focused on preserving and making accessible, collections that are maybe a little bit larger and sort of coming from multiple institutions. So I would recommend looking at that program. They have a planning level that can be really good for formalizing those relationships and what that would look like. The PAG program is really, I think, better suited towards projects that are for individual organizations dealing with their specific collections.
The next question comes from Christopher. Do you support projects where a building is updated so that a collection is preserved? We have a lot of windows that prevent us from displaying portions of our collection because of light exposure.
Sure, that's a great question. So within PAG, the sort of activity that you could do that would assist in that could be either to purchase and install UV film and shades for those windows. That's something that you could fund through PAG. It does have to be reversible as the one caveat, but otherwise that is fundable through PAG. If you're looking at something a little bit broader, or your windows are massive and the $10,000 is not quite enough, I would actually recommend looking at the Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections program, which is somewhat of a sister program to PAG. A lot of PAG applicants move on to that program for some of their sort of bigger sort of structural changes if they need to do some bigger actual sort of either building renovation work or restructuring, or need to purchase larger amounts of storage furnishings, those kinds of things. You can go from a PAG assessment to a Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections project that would fund that kind of work. So I would definitely look at that program. They're going to be having a live webinar early next month. So I would also look on our website to check out that webinar as well for some of the more retrofitting, building upgrade structural projects.
Our next question is from Candace. If a collection size is that of what is considered a larger institution, but the organization, budget, and staffing is that of a small to mid-size institution, would this constitute a small to mid-size organization overall?
That's a great question. So yeah, we don't have specific guidelines of collection size or staff size. We do have a form that we will ask you to sort of describe some of those, but it's not an eligibility issue. So you can apply. Where we sometimes have that question about size really comes into play once all of the panel reviews have happened and we have sort of the recommendations from the panelists. If, for example, we have more eligible projects or more fundable projects than we have a budget for, that's where we might start to look at general sort of size of an institution. I will say to this point in time, that hasn't happened yet. That doesn't mean it can't happen in the future, but at least to this point in time, we have always been able to really fund everything that has been fundable and ready to go as projects. So I wouldn't be too concerned about sort of that aspect. And again, it's really part of how you describe yourself in your narrative. So there'll be that section in the narrative to talk about your institution, and you can really sort of explain, while we have, this number of collections, this is our staff size, this is our volunteer size, and that really puts means that we're in that smaller mid-sized category and need some more assistance.
And our next question is from Laura. For a consultant we are working with, if they assist us with our application and proposed budget, can the funding we receive include back pay for the consultant's time helping us prepare the application to ensure they work with us? Or can it only include pay after September?
That's a great question. So technically, the activities that the application can go towards have to be activities that happen during the period of performance. So that really is that project timeline from September 1st plus 18 months. Technically, there is a scenario where you can, if some activities happened, I believe it's 90 days prior, but don't quote me on that. I would check with our Office of Grants Management on that. Sometimes there is the ability to include some of the work that happened 90 days prior, but again, it has to be related to the main activities of the project itself. So unfortunately, I don't think that that you would be able to include back pay as an eligible expense or as an itemized expense in a project budget.
And the next question is from Lucas. How do you think about the balance between preservation goals and access goals?
That's a wonderful question. And it really is so dependent on the collections and the material types that you have. This program is really focused a lot more on sort of the physical preservation of the collections, a little less so on access, other than that we are really trying to make sure that, when it comes to the collections management side of things, disassociation, not knowing what an object is, not having that information, is a barrier to preserving the item, which then becomes a barrier to making it accessible. So in that sense, this program is dealing with sort of the knowledge around your collections, and that is a part of accessibility. But otherwise, this program really is focused more on the preservation of the collections itself. We do have other programs that focus more on access. So again, I mentioned previously the Humanities Collections and Reference Resources program is one that focuses more on access when it comes to providing, projects that are for providing access, whether that be through bigger projects to do more descriptive cataloging work, whether that's digitization projects. This program can fund some minor cataloging work, which is really like preliminary, just to deal with things like inventory surveys. But it's really more focused on the preservation side. When you're talking about access in terms of as part of the narrative, like how do you make the collections accessible, as sort of an argument for why it's important to preserve the collections, then we're really discussing things like what are the ways in which you make the collections accessible, such as, are they on display in museums, and are the collections rotated so that your museum is able to show up different parts of the collections. If it's about researcher access, what are the ways in which you make them accessible? Are they available for researchers to contact you to be able to gain access to the collections? The collections don't necessarily have to be available 24/7 to the general public. We recognize that that's not always possible, both because of institutional capacity, but also because of preservation needs. Certain collection items may be very delicate, and you have to be careful with how they're made available. But of course, to be able to make items more available, you have to physically preserve them first. So that's really what we're thinking about in this program.
The next question comes from the Sargent County Museum. Do you need the consultant each time? What if you have not gotten all the things on your list from before? Can you build a room for storage in this grant?
That's a great question. So I'll try to address it in the different parts. So do you need a consultant every time? No. Really you need a consultant for things like if you've not had a preservation assessment and you need, preservation expertise to help you with that. If you need a specific kind of assessment, say you want, an assessment of just your digital collections, say you need a conservation assessment, those are places where you're going to want to hire a consultant. Or if you have staff that needs training in certain areas, that's where you'll want to hire a consultant. But say you've done that work, say you have an assessment and you need funding to actually begin to implement those recommendations. You don't need a consultant again if you're implementing the recommendations. We just ask that you provide the backup from the consultant that you already had, so that they'll provide you a report, and that you provide the relevant components of that report that are sort of backup for the request you're making to us now, whether that's for storage furniture, data loggers, any of those pieces. Say you're working on updating your collections management policies. You don't necessarily need a consultant for that. If you have staff in your organization that has expertise in doing that kind of work, you just need to show that you have that expertise in the project staff that will be working on it. So no, you don't always need a consultant. It really is dependent on the project that you are requesting funding for. In terms of building a storage room out, if it is, if you're trying to, build out a storage room, sort of retrofit a space within a building you already have, the program for that is really going to be the Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections program. PAG is only $10,000. It's not going to be able to sort of fund actually getting the walls up, getting everything prepared and ready. It could certainly fund some of the storage furnishing that you might need, or some of the ancillary items like data loggers that you might want in that room, but it's not going to fund a bigger project like that. Something like that, I would really recommend looking at Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections.
And our next question is from Katie. Are there any education requirements for staff that will be working on the project? We are an archive team within a nonprofit theater, so our backgrounds may not seem typical. We do, however, have a consultant overseeing our progress.
Sure. So that's a great question. So really what we're looking for, obviously we understand that depending on the type of institution, because yes, while we generally do work with museums, libraries, archives, historical societies, performing arts organizations are certainly eligible. Really, any organization that has humanities collections is an eligible organization. It's really about the collections, not what your organization is. It's about what are your collections, how do they relate to the humanities, and how do you make them accessible to humanities researchers, scholars, and the public. So in that sense, we understand that not everyone is going to come from sort of a museum, library, archive background. But that's exactly why this program, allows for bringing in consultants. That's really the key. So it's how can you use consultants to bring in the expertise that you need for the project that your staff may not already have. The other thing I recommend too for organizations that are dealing with these humanities collections and are trying to really professionalize them and find ways to make them more available and accessible and preserve them, is, this project can fund training for your staff. So, and not just in disaster response, it can fund training in collections management. It can fund training in collections care. So that can look like either having a consultant come on site and do training, or it can look like your staff and volunteers going to training through a preservation field service program. So it really is up to you as to what makes sense for your organization. But I also just recommend, along with being able to use consultants for their expertise. Also, just remembering that this program can fund training for your staff and volunteers as well to help, increase their own knowledge and expertise as well.
And our next question is from Laura. What would you say are some of the common reasons an application is denied?
That's a great question. So, I think the first piece would be if there is a request for a project and the reviewers just don't see the expertise in the staff or consultant. So if the consultant that was requested, or if there's not a consultant and it's just staff and they don't see the expertise needed in the qualifications of that staff or consultant to actually appropriately address the project, that could be a reason. Another one is, I think sometimes organizations, in sort of making the case, they may not put enough attention into really describing what their collections are and why they're significant. Sometimes, we work so much within our own collections or our own organizations that, of course we're important and everybody should know that. But the reality is we're a huge country. We have all kinds of different histories. And, the panelists may or may not be familiar with your organization. And so they may or may not know what's in your collection. So it really is important in, taking at least like one full page out of those 5 pages to really dig deep into, these are our collections that are the focus of the project. This is, how they relate to our local and regional history. This is why they're important. This is the amount of collections we have. That's one that I've seen sometimes is that if an applicant forgets to tell us, like, what is the size of the collection that they're working with, then it becomes very difficult to know whether the work plan is feasible or not, because we don't know what the size of the collections are. So things like that, are sometimes some of the pieces that, it's usually either that they haven't made a strong enough case for the significance, or that there's something missing in the methodology. So for example, coming in and requesting, say that, if you're requesting storage furniture for your collections, but you didn't include information about how you decided that that was the appropriate storage furnishings. So there's not an assessment as part of your backup that recommended certain supplies, or, that, you didn't have expertise, either on staff or in a consultant, to help you select what's the right kind of storage equipment for the collection material types that you have. So those are some of the things that we might see that might make an application less competitive.
And our next question is from Kate. If your proposal uses the full 18-month period of performance and it gets funded, and you're making progress as you plan, can you apply for the next annual cycle if you have an appropriate project, even though you have an active grant?
Sure. So yes, technically, you can apply. We don't have any, you don't have to have finished one grant to apply to another at the NEH. You can technically apply to almost all of our programs and receive all of them at the same time. We don't have restrictions there. What you'll really need to just be able to show is that what you're applying for, that you have enough, if it is related to the work that you were already doing, then you need to show that you have enough from that previous project as sort of the impetus and backup for why this next project is important. So where that might be an issue is, for example, if you are having an assessment and you don't have that assessment report yet, then I would recommend holding off, because I think, unfortunately, without having the final assessment report, you know, and not knowing sort of what those final recommendations are from your consultant, if that was the project, then you're not going to have enough backup to really be able to the panelists are going to be like, well, we kind of want to see what the assessment is going to tell you before you go ahead and just start purchasing supplies. That said, if you are working on, say you already had an assessment and you're working on one project from that assessment, there might be another recommendation from that assessment that you could apply for in the next round. And you could still be finishing the one project, but they're not necessarily related activities. Say one was for, rehousing supplies and the next one is for data loggers. Well, you can absolutely be working on both of those at the same time. They're not necessarily activities that one has to flow directly before or behind the other. So that's where you could see, that situation working.
And our next question is from Kate, and it's a follow-up to Laura's question regarding pre-award consultant work. Kate asks, is it typical for consultants to get paid for the pre-application prep work separately, or do preservation consultants typically price in some free prep work to the amount they plan to charge for the work so that it will be carried out in the future if the proposal is funded?
That is a great question. So typically consultants, and again, I'm not 100% sure on this because every consultant is different. So typically consultants aren't necessarily doing a lot of pre work. They may not be, they're certainly not writing the application for you per se. Some might be, but many are not. Really, what they're usually providing is that letter of commitment. They certainly will be discussing the project with you to make sure that it is an appropriate project. So there may be some conversations, but it's really that letter of commitment. So I unfortunately can't give a firm answer on that. I think every consultant is different. There might be some that request that. I don't think that's common, though. I don't think it's common for consultants to be asking for funds prior to an award. So that's just something to consider as you're sort of looking for consultants, seeing sort of what are they asking for in that sense.
Our next question is from Bertha. Did answer this in the chat, but it's been asked a couple of times, so I want to ensure, in case this individual doesn't have access to the chat. Does a small church that is a 501c3 just be getting to work with their archives? Are they eligible to apply?
Absolutely. So as long as you're a 501c3 and you've got collections, you are eligible to apply. We definitely do not have any restrictions on religious institutions.
And then what appears to be our last question as of now is from Mark. What grant programs would be good for moving image digitization after we assess our collection?
That is a great question. So there are a couple different programs that could be good for that. In our agency and in our division, I would recommend looking at the Humanities Collections and Reference Resources Program. That is really our main digitization program. I would also recommend, depending on the size of your collections, I would recommend looking at the Saving America's Treasures program. That is a program run through the National Park Service, but that NEH and the Division of Preservation and Access are also partners in. So that is another good program to look at as well for digitizing collections. You may also want to look at some of our sister agencies like the Institute of Museum and Library Services that also have some funding for digitizing collections. So I hope amongst those three, potential programs that you find something that could be reasonable for digitizing your AV collections. And with that, I think we're a little over time. It's great to have so many questions, but I do want to be cognizant of everybody's time. So I think we should probably leave it there. If you do have other questions, please, please, please email and call us at the number and email on your screen. You can also just always go to our website and find the same contact information there. We are here for you as you are sort of figuring out your project, putting your applications together. Feel free to contact us with either sort of general project questions, specific questions. We are happy to answer all of it. So I want to thank my colleague Sarah Bateman so much for your help today, and really hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of their day. And please, 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 we are so looking forward to helping you along your preservation journey. So we just hope that you apply, and then and even if you're not successful the first time around, please come back to us. Because we have seen a lot of folks who are sometimes not successful their first time become successful with revision and resubmission. We are here to help you through that process as well. So again, just that's the biggest thing I can always say is email us, call us. We are here to help you through the whole process. So thank you all for coming today, and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.